Welcome to episode 8 of the J plus R movie podcast. Today we're doing another double feature, discussing two films at the same time. This time we did it with Dracula and Horror of Dracula. This time we're doing it with Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars. So if to give a kind of plot summary of both films, or a plot synopsis of both films, both of them essentially feature the same basic story of a mysterious lone individual coming into a town, seeing that this town is at war with itself, with two opposing sides, chooses to kind of play both sides, but ultimately has the intention of wiping out one specific bad guy in that town. And a lot of the same things happen in both of the films. The major difference is, of course, setting. Yojimbo takes place in 1800s Japan, whilst Fistful of Dollars takes place just in the Old West, essentially.
Of both of them, I got very different things out of both of them as well. For a while, A Fistful of Dollars was my favourite film a few years ago. For me, I always love coming back to it because I think it's a great depiction of an anti-hero in the Western. It's a very, very tense, kind of intimate film. And despite the fact that it does have scale, it feels intimate the whole time, and it's ugly, and it's a fantastic subversion of the traditional Western. So for me, I find myself drawn in, and I found the plot really, really engaging. And then I didn't actually know it was a remake originally, the first time I'd seen it. And I got into Kurosawa quite recently, and I love Kurosawa as a filmmaker. Just brilliant. Which, to be fair, doesn't really need to be said. That's one of the most redundant things I've ever said. But Kurosawa, the fact remains, I love Kurosawa films. And when I sat there and watched Yojimbo, and I found myself really loving the central character. I thought the plot worked really, really well as well, and I quite liked to see the difference in the way the action was done as well, because with Yojimbo there was a lot more. It felt a bit more mythic to me, Yojimbo, than Fistful of Dollars is. Ironically, it was a human protagonist in a mythic film, while Fistful of Dollars is a mythic protagonist in a human film. Is almost the way I describe it in terms of motion, tone, and the way things were sorted out and presented.
Yeah, that's a good point. A very good point. So what I would say is that basically, so I have a longer history with A Fistful of Dollars because I think I watched it when I was a kid, when I was very obsessed with Clint Eastwood movies and the Dollars trilogy as well. But I don't have many memories of watching A Fistful of Dollars as a kid. I've one memory, but that's it. I have more memories of his other films, especially the other two in the trilogy. But although I have a bit more history, I watched Yojimbo Jack a bit more recently when I was binging a few Kurosawa films, and yeah, obviously I'm in agreement with you on him being a great director, and I think Yojimbo is probably my favorite of the films that I've seen of his so far. I think I prefer it to A Fistful of Dollars as well, and I think the reason why it engaged me a bit more, there was a sense of character to Yojimbo that wasn't quite as present in A Fistful of Dollars, and what I mean by that is in the supporting characters as well, because in Yojimbo everyone feels characterized. A few characters that you can be oh, they don't have any personality or anything, and all of them are lively, and there's a comparison between the fairly lively cast, whether that be the villains or whether that be the people that he kind of meets, like the shop owner. And that was interesting when you took all this stuff and you compared it to the slightly more real, down-to-earth main character. And that was a contrast that I felt worked, and I felt that the film it made good use of its fairly short running time as well. It explored, it went through a lot of things. It went through, again, it had a complicated narrative.
One thing that kind of hit you immediately watching the films is just how similar they are.
I assume that A Fistful of Dollars was a remake, but it actually wasn't a remake. It was an unofficial remake.
It was never commissioned, but they remade it. And I think the story that I love is that Akira Kurosawa, he called up Sergio Leone, and he said, "Great film. It's my film, but it's a great film. Pay me." Obviously, that did end up happening. I think because it is an unofficial remake, what makes it really interesting is the different cultural influences on it, because although they are the same narratively, they're structured the same, the kind of messaging and tone to them is they're very different films in that regard.
as a result of the cultural change.
Yeah, and as a result of where of the setting and how they're directed and the context around it in the two nationalities, and I think that really does boil down to the way the protagonist does what they do and the reasons why they are very much under their own cultural influences. So, for example, Sanjuro's goal throughout the film is an honourable one. He is functioning as you would expect a samurai to. He wants to end the violence in the town. He wants to fight for his own honor and fight for the honor of the town and kind of preserve that almost traditional sense of Japanese society. That's what he's trying to do. So throughout the film, he quite frequently doesn't really accept money and things like that for his. So he pretends to, so that he can make his moves. But when the opportunity to save someone comes up or anything like that happens, he takes it. Whilst you get, on the other hand, you get the man with no name, who pretty much does absolutely everything for money, and is a lot more of, I would call him a bit more of a hard bastard character than Sanjuro. He's very much he's very quick to violence, very willing to kill pretty much immediately. Well, I'm pretty sure his introduction in the film involves him killing a guy, while Sanjuro doesn't do it for a little bit of time afterwards.
First time you see Sanjuro kill someone, when they're kind of coming up to him and antagonizing him already, like the bad side of the town, the people who are part of that bad side, they're coming up to him, they're already antagonizing him, and then he just fights back. Whereas the first time, and this is definitely a very memorable scene if you've seen A Fistful of Dollars, it's the bit where he wants them to apologize to his mule, because like a couple of people antagonize the man with no name and like shoot like at his mule, like not like on the floor near his mule, and scares the mule, and then he basically says like, oh, I don't care, but I want you to apologize to my mule, and then when they refuse, he just kills all four of them.
I think the difference is the way they approach it as well. With Sanjuro, he gives them plenty of chances to back off, and then when they don't do it, that's when he kills two guys to just prove he's not to be messed with, walks off, and it kind of incites people to approach him to be their bodyguard. While with the man with no name, he deliberately sought out the fight after what happened, and they'd antagonized him a bit, but he could have rode on, but he didn't. He antagonized the fight. Wasn't really giving them a chance because he knew they wouldn't back off. Absolutely, for sure. You could just see it in the way that he kind of raised his eye, and he was pretty much at his gun already, and then boom, you're in there, and he fought. He just killed them. I think he was shown to take a bit more joy out of it than Sanjuro is.
I don't know if I'd say joy, but there's less of a purpose. There's less of a. It's more because he wants to do it. Because they have the same kind of storylines. There is in both films that humanizing moment where he saves the family. A bit more of a redemption for the man with no name character. He has been characterized as immoral, and that's not to say that Sanjuro is a moral character himself in Yojimbo, that he's definitely less immoral than the man with no name. But the point is that both characters do get that moment where they save the family. The other major difference as well is in the final kind of confrontation as well. In both films, there's a one-on-one thing between the main character and the villain. In the Yojimbo one, he gives the guy his pistol back. So he gives Unosuke the chance to kill him, but Unosuke just can't, he just isn't able to. Whereas in Fistful of Dollars, the way that ends is it's essentially a duel. It's essentially like who can pick up the gun the fastest and who can shoot the other person the fastest. So although they're both on equal footing, not necessarily as honourable.
It's a bit of a scramble for the gun. Unlike Jimbo, he also cheats because he's got a plate jammed up under his chest. While for Jimbo, it's very much a physical contest of who's the better fighter. While for the man with no name, it's a lot more about, no, I just want to live through this and win. And that's a big difference between the characters. I think Sanjuro has got that focus on honor and moral purpose in the fight, while the man with no name almost kind of lives for his self-interest and self-profit.
It's a study in how you define two people as anti-heroes, but still make them different. Do the same actions, but have it be different. By changing these scenes, that does characterize them differently.
Sanjuro, to me, is a lot closer to a traditional hero. The only reason he
Yes.
really is an anti-hero at all is because he does play them up against each other, which was, which isn't considered a heroic method in Japanese society. And the Man with No Name is more directly unpleasant, nasty, and you can almost see how he was not that far removed from people like Ramon. The only difference is he's wholly individualist.
And he has a bit of a conscience. He does have at least a little bit, whereas Ramon clearly doesn't have any qualms about doing anything.
So he's got the slightest bit of a conscience. His overriding motivation is himself, while for Sanjuro it's not. I think that is the crucial difference between these films. It changes the context of the violence as well. With A Fistful of Dollars, you always see it pretty much from the behind the barrel of the gun. You see people get shot. You don't really get it in a big wide with actions and trading gunfire. You see it. You're right in the middle of it, and you see it from the perspective, and it involves you in that violence. You have to feel how uncomfortable it is and how nasty it is, which then makes the Man with No Name seem rougher and nastier as a person. It also makes the villain's actions seem that much more evil. While in Yojimbo, it's shot what I would call a bit more classically. So while it's closer than Kurosawa typically gets, you still have grander set pieces where they've got, big wides and sword blows being traded like that, and it doesn't follow that closely to the characters. It's not like right behind them in the middle of the action so much. It's you are a bit more of an observer of it, and it does. Don't go wrong, it does cut for emotional moments, but it's not that getting close isn't the overriding factor of the action like it is in Fistful of Dollars.
I also do feel like Fistful of Dollars, it feels a bit grander in its scale than Yojimbo. Yojimbo feels a bit more contained. That being said, both of the films are consistent in how they utilize space. Like sometimes they go very small, but sometimes they kind of draw back and try and emphasize the large amount of people, or to give an example, in Yojimbo, in so many scenes there are multiple people in the shot. So sometimes it is just Sanjuro, but very rarely is it just one person. Oftentimes it's a lot of people.
I think it's just him a lot more when he's being tortured, for example. I think that's where you get the most emotional connection to the film. Typically, Sanjuro is shown in a way almost watching what his work has done, or he's often interacting with another character. Though he's a wandering samurai on his own at the start of the film, and then becomes that again at the end. And he has moments where he is alone. He's most often in conversation or a part of a community, while the Man with No Name is a bit more of an independent operator. He spends a lot more time on his own and pursuing goals in his own way, so you don't get as much need for multi-person shots in the film because they're not there. And I think a difference between how Kurosawa and Leone do a dialogue scene as well is Leone will use a lot more close-ups in a dialogue scene than Kurosawa will. Kurosawa will use them, but he tends to let quite a bit of dialogue go in the one shot or in fewer shots. Well, Leone prefers to kind of create a bit of a rhythm with his cinematography inside the conversations.
Yeah, Dollars is definitely a bit more shot reverse shot idea, whereas Yojimbo, the shots feel a bit more static.
The camera works a lot still not static because the camera will move with characters and things like that. Yeah. So I think its perspective is a bit more static. The perspective of observation, while for the Dollars, it bounces around a little bit more. It's the difference between a more objective and a more subjective camera. And don't get me wrong, there are points in both where it gets a bit objective in The Fistful of Dollars occasionally, and it gets more subjective at points in Yojimbo, particularly as Yorosake is dying. For the most part, it kind of has that objective, subjective.
Also, I thought that the visual look was more impressive than A Fistful of Dollars.
Yeah, I will agree with that. And there's one scene that I always remember from Yojimbo. One shot that I will give an honourable mention to is the one where he's up on that watchtower watching the chaos he's created. I just think it's an amazing shot where you can't see it from behind his shoulder and you just see him watching and just laughing at it. It's pretty. But one shot that I always remember, and I think, have you seen? Do you know the channel Every Frame a Painting?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I think it's the thumbnail for his video on Akira Kurosawa and how he composes a movement. For me, it's as he's walking at the climax when he's walking through the smoke. He just has two hands behind his back and he's just moving, and the camera pulls back, as he's
Yeah.
as he's moving, just follows him in this very methodical pace. He seems like this unstoppable force of nature, and everything
Mhm.
whips around him. And I think that's just probably one of my favorite shots in any film.
That's a great shot, but to me, what kind of stuck out more was the close-up ones. And what I mean by that is kind of at the beginning, like the opening credits, for example, like a high-angle shot, and he's just kind of walking. It's close on him. It's not full close. It's not extreme close, but it is very close on him as you have the opening credits. And you have a lot of tight, close shots, but they kind of it engages you without there needing to be a lot happening in the scene. Like just the shot out there draws you in, and you're immediately sucked in.
I do think it's a slightly better film, although I do actually think that A Fistful of Dollars is the best one of the Man with No Name trilogy. Mm-hmm. What does elevate Yojimbo is that there is that balance of an individualist protagonist and a social setting, which gives more time to the other characters to be fully developed. Yojimbo, everyone felt like a defined person, even though there were people you could be like, yeah, I could do without you. Almost everyone had, kind of clear ideas, goals, fears that were just established. And I think that's part of why, for me, I prefer that it was a bit smaller scale, because the intimacy really helped it.
And it's almost a contrast as well. You have the often type cinematography, yet you have this sense of like several people combined together, several people all joined, but a lot of various people, and a lot of people with their own like individual kind of identities as well. Besides the group stuff, it didn't necessarily feel like anybody was interchangeable. Another thing that I kind of preferred, it's a bit objective, but it's also a bit subjective as well. A Fistful of Dollars, unfortunately, one thing that does stick out, most of the cast didn't speak English, so therefore they had to record a lot of the dialogue through dubbing. And unfortunately, it's very, very obvious. Like I would say that is the only big flaw with that film. If you're not looking for it, you might not even pick up on it, but I think if you're looking, you'll be able to spot that when people's mouths are moving, the words that are coming out, or the
don't
dialogue
quite match up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they match up for old Clint most of the time, but then for everyone else, not really. It can distract you if you know it's there and you look for it. I don't think it's much of a problem if you're not looking for it, because I don't think you'll really notice that much. They don't do the best job, but they do a pretty decent job of covering it. But
it's something that you kind of notice, I feel, unconsciously. Human ear can tell the difference between dubbed dialogue and not dubbed dialogue, but it also depends.
Yeah, it's the same way you can tell
the difference.
Recorded voice message sounds like, as opposed to a real speech.
Mm-hmm. But again, there are some people who probably don't know that difference, so they might watch it and not notice it.
For me, it doesn't really massively interrupt the viewing experience. It is a flaw with the film. Well, it doesn't mess with my ability to enjoy it.
No, it didn't. It didn't with me either. It's just better when it wasn't there. The thing about both films is that I don't think that they're very like heavy on like giving messages or like themes or anything. Not that they aren't there, but I don't think that they exist to give specific messages. They exist to tell stories. Both of them are very narrative based, somewhat character based, but very, very narrative based.
Characters are important, but I agree with you. It's about the plot and the way it develops and the way the characters function within the plot as opposed to how they are. Personally, to me, I think that's a big part of why they both work. Each scene drives the plot forward. You don't have unnecessary scenes. I couldn't take a scene out of either film and have it still work. But I think the thing that gets me about each one is that they really do appeal to different styles of filmmaking. And I think they're brilliant examples of the style that they go for.
One of them is Western, the other one is Samurai. And with that, you get, different styles and different, like, visuals.
And the set design, I think, is embodied in the way the characters interact, the cinematography as well, because you're implicated on a personal level in A Fistful of Dollars. You're made to watch the gun fire, and you're made to be right there with it from its perspective as it dishes out death. So it's almost like you almost become the gun in the scene. Well, with Yojimbo, you're allowed to appreciate the skill and the kind of impressiveness of the combat, and it gives you a kind of feeling of honor that you don't get from Fistful, right down to the way that they shoot the action, the way that the characters function, and the way that they use speech, the way that they use violence, the way that they use character relationships. The films, I think they're definitive of their genres. Samurai films of the modern age owe quite a lot to Kurosawa in general. You've got 13 Assassins, Ronin and The Last Samurai, and Harakiri and Blade of the Immortal. You've got The Hidden Blade. Final thoughts. In terms of quality, I don't think they're that far away at all. I think it depends on what kind of your sensibilities are
Hmm.
cinematically. I mean, personally, I really like the way that Kurosawa constructs his visuals, so I'm more engaged with Yojimbo. But I think if you don't like a lot of wides, and if you like Orange County, you'll probably get on better with A Fistful of Dollars. I think both films should be watched, and I think they're both really entertaining, narratively rewarding for anyone that watches them. I think they're just films that kind of transcend specific audiences and things like that, which is quite a rare thing, and I would definitely recommend both of them.
Fistful of Dollars, obviously the other two films in the Dollars trilogy, I think are more worth watching, but I think that whether on its own or part of the set, it's still the first one is still worthwhile. Yojimbo, I think, is great. It feels a bit different to Kurosawa's other films. Whatever you think, don't necessarily expect that that is how a few of Kurosawa's other films will be, at least in terms of own. Expect his other films to be a bit more heavy and kind of somber and dramatic, whereas this one is much more entertaining and action heavy and fun. That's part of why I'd recommend it. One of his lighter films, even though it's not necessarily a light film, but it is a bit lighter by comparison. Because I've seen like emotionally draining stuff like Ran or Ikuru. Yeah, overall, I mean, I think that both of them are fairly well known, so a lot of people will have seen them. But if you haven't seen them, yeah, go ahead, watch them.
Immediately.
The next episode, it's going to be a bit of a it's going to be a bit of a cheery two-parter. It's going to be two films that deal with the subject of child abuse. One of them is Mysterious Skin, and the other one is The Book of Henry.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye. With Yojimbo, what I enjoyed seeing was just the badassery of, Sanjuro. Like, Sanjuro is just like, in the first act, he is just a cool motherfucker. He's just a cool character. And the reason why he's cool is because he does everything so effortlessly. He does it without effort, and the way that that gets conveyed to us is through his interactions with others, but also his own choices as well.
I think what really clinches it for me, that it just kind of showed you, this guy's smooth bastard, was when he went up against the two gang members,
Yeah.
when they tried to hustle him, where he just killed two of them, put his sword away, and just walked off immediately.
I know when he cut the arm off, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't stick around. He didn't waste any more time. He just walked back to his lodgings. Just everyone was just left in the silence. I thought that was brilliant. That moment. It was just establishes just how dangerous your protagonist is, and then it made sense why the gangs were going after him, because they realised, my God, he's worth at least four of my guys. See the power flip in his direction in that moment.
Even in terms of his interactions with people, it's like he's able to just get what he wants. He can talk his way into getting what he wants, and again, he does it effortlessly. He doesn't need to he doesn't have
barely
to.
even looks at them half the time.
I know, he's just like, yeah, you're gonna give me that. You're gonna give me 50 Rio, or I want this, and then he's just able to get it. He's able to make people have it. But what's interesting is that that's kind of like then subverted in a couple of ways, because you then like in the bit where he's getting like beaten up as well, like there's heavy focus on the fact that like now he kind of has to, now he can't do that, now he's truly met his match, and now the only way that he can survive is just by doing things, essentially. Like he can't like talk his way into doing something, he just has to do it. And you believe that he could do it, but you think to yourself like, wow, this guy has had the shit kicked out of him, can he truly survive on his badass ways? But he is able to, through smart and logical thinking, and that kind of element is not quite there in A Fistful of Dollars. Like, although the bit where he says, oh, the bit after he kills the four guys and he said, make that four coffins, that bit is really good. But you don't really get that as much from the man with no name, because he feels more like a guy who just kind of does things, like, yeah, he gets what he wants, but he just does things, he does things, again, like you identified, because he wants to. And so therefore there's less of a like charm to his character and more of a, I don't know, I mean, both of them are definitely cool and confident.
It's a different way of doing it. I think Yojimbo is a lot more of a talker than the man with no name. As much as Yojimbo's, he's almost got the two levels of function. You can see Yojimbo pretty much thriving in every single situation he finds himself in, be it domestic or not. Well, you get the idea that the man with no name is a warrior through and through. It's what he does, it's what he lives, it's who he is. He was called a bit more detached killer, and in a more social setting than the ones he needs to be in. You don't always get the idea that he would thrive. Like, yeah, sure, he can play people off against each other. That's fine, but could he, for example, just get what he asked for because he asked for it without flashing the money about? I think Sanjuro ever pays for anything in this film. Like
No,
he
I think he does.
mentioned money, but he doesn't seem to consider anything about it, which for me is something that, again, makes him seem really cool because he just doesn't need to care about it.
Yeah, and it's also showing the difference between the two lead performances. Toshio Mifune gives a really fantastic performance because he's extremely charismatic, and that charisma kind of just it comes naturally. It doesn't feel forced or put on at all. It just feels natural. And the way that he plays the role, again, you can just sort of tell just by watching him acting that he is a person with a lot of history, because you think to yourself, this guy's not behaving like an amateur, he's behaving like a professional. He's behaving like a professional with a lot of experience. And the same is kind of felt with like the man with no name. But the thing is that the way that Eastwood plays him, he just seems like he doesn't really care a lot. And that is partially because Eastwood, or at least not in the man with no name role, he's not a very expressive performer. He's very quiet and stoic.
The man with no name cares that much because his primary involvement is money. I think that's another difference between the characters. As long as the man with no name ends up getting paid, he doesn't particularly give a shit what he's doing. Well, Sanjuro is very much planned it out, for an honourable reason. He's got a clear goal in mind to save this town, and so he cares a lot more. Well, the man with no name, he does play people off and he does execute a plan, but it's all to get him more money. So he will do whatever gets him that money, and that's the bit where you see him sort of caring. And other people don't matter that much to him, particularly. Well, I mean, the family does for a bit, but I feel that's more just it's difficult to see people get ripped apart and abused as opposed to any sort of actual moral quandary.
What's notable as well is that the beating scene is extended in A Fistful of Dollars.
It's almost like the punishment for how he's been.
Which is the same in Yojimbo, but it's a bit more extended.
So you've got them being made.
I think more when you think of Asian Japanese influence, you think more like fantasy, because the thing about Yojimbo is that it's very much grounded in reality, whereas oftentimes whenever we see these kind of translations from Asia or Japan, I just feel like it's more fantasy based, more of a Chinese thing, like the fantasy element stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's for Chinese. It's that's called a wuxia film. The samurai genre feels fantastical because the samurai has become an almost mythical figure. The samurai feels like a figure removed from reality, and like you said, ancient, even though they're really not. They're the equivalent of a medieval knight that just lasted quite a lot longer than our version did. So that's what they are. Because the samurai feels almost like a character that's out of time and just survived long after it should have done. Western society has progressed, so we almost apply that subconsciously to others. Especially for a Western audience, a samurai film feels like a mythical figure because a samurai feels like a myth rather than history, and especially because they've been given so much legend and fanfare over the years. While the cowboy from A Fistful of Dollars doesn't, although I have argued that the character is mythical in the film because of his almost complete isolation and focus on how he is. It feels more like history than it does a mythical figure. It feels like a hero of a bygone era rather than.
I think the cowboy is definitely mythic, but yeah, I agree that samurai is a mythic too.
I think the difference is the cowboy feels a lot more like an attainable myth than a samurai does.
Yeah, I agree.